sit, buddy.
This House is in session. Prior to the suspension on the 24th of February, this House was in Standing Finance Committee. We revert to Standing Finance Committee.
Mr. Chairman, Head 35, Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, in the amount of $76,853,931.
Mr. Chairman, good morning. I beg your indulgence to allow myself and the Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown to join our team that is situated downstairs so that we could present our presentation and answer questions, if it suits you, sir. At your convenience, Mr. Chair.
Honourable member, you may proceed with your opening remarks. Let me advise those members of yourself and those members of your team. As Honourable Minister, you will be allowed 10 minutes opening remarks, and members of your team, for any question that has to be answered, you're allowed 3 minutes so to respond. You may proceed, Honourable member.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by thanking all the honourable members who are here, and yourself and the Honourable Speaker of the House, for allowing us to be able to make this presentation this morning and to have my team come and address the questions that will be asked of them in relation to the performance of the ministry and the plans going forward. Before I begin, I would take this opportunity, sir, to introduce the persons whom I have with me. To my right is the Parliamentary Secretary and the representative for the City of Bridgetown, my honourable colleague, Mr. Corey Lane. To my left is the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry, Ms. Gabrielle Springer. Also joining us are the Senior Accountant, the Deputy Permanent Secretary, the Chief Welfare Officer, the Senior Admin Officer, our Coordinator for Poverty, Mr. Pollard, the Project Manager, one of our Research Analysts, the Director of Child Care Board, or her designate, whom I see, and the Director of the National Assistance Board. We also have here the Director of the National Disabilities Unit, and the Director of the Bureau of Gender Affairs, and the Deputy Director of the HIV/AIDS Commission, whom are all here to be able to answer any questions that you may have as it relates to the ministry, to our role, to our plans, to our achievements, and the things that we have every intention of achieving over the next year. Mr. Chair, first let me thank the persons who are here. I and myself and the Parliamentary Secretary are new to the ministry. I have the opportunity now to chair what I think to lead a very distinguished group of men and women who would have served Barbados with tremendous distinction over the last few months and years. And I speak, of course, of the intervention made by this ministry as a representative of the people, being true to its name, People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs. Of course, I would want to begin also by thanking the former minister, the Honourable Member for St. Thomas, who would have led this ministry so ably and who has made my job tremendously easy by putting in place the necessary foundation to allow us to perform. Sir, it is well known what this ministry is normally focused on. We came, sir, to office with a mandate, a very big mandate, to bring relief to people. None of us knew at that time that we would be struck with COVID, ashfall, a hurricane, or any of the few emergencies that were before us. The ministry normally, sir, whether it is in this iteration, the former iteration of social care, whether it was social transformation, had a focus primarily on social protection to be able to offer goods and services to the most vulnerable. And this focus on social protection, sir, has allowed us to be able to serve people at the most difficult of times and through the most difficult of circumstances, and has allowed Barbadians to be able to live in a very challenging time. I also feel, sir, that as we move the ministry forward, our focus on making sure that the disabled, the elderly, persons who are otherwise marginalized, the lower socioeconomic bracket, persons who may be affected by HIV and AIDS, persons for whom this ministry has a responsibility, that we have also to look not only at social protection, but to give true meaning and expression to the idea of empowerment and what that will mean for all. And so it is in this regard, sir, that we will look at our social policies and hopefully be able to say that in the next year we've brought our policies and our programs closer to the people, but that we've also had a focus on empowerment. It is no doubt, sir, that I think that a shift must also happen, that the ministry that we now lead, sir, must have a social development approach, which is somewhat bigger than a social protection approach, while we focus not only on protection, but also on opportunities for advancement, while we look at issues pertaining to climate change and the other vagaries that may affect the persons who are most vulnerable. Sir, we recognize that it's not only about protection, but it's about a definition of social development that finds favor with me, which is about understanding that it's planned social change that promotes the well-being of a population in conjunction with a dynamic process of economic development. I feel very strongly, sir, that the persons whom we serve, that the very minimum should be protection, the very minimum should be some kind of social assistance, but that in its true sense, what we must seek to do is really empower persons. And I do so recognizing, as we spoke of, sir, the geopolitical considerations that we now must take into consideration and the impact that this will have on our persons, sir. So I do not wish to spend too much time on that. We'll have a lot of time to discuss the vision, but it really must be an empowerment ministry. People's empowerment must be more than just the name of the ministry. Sir, a few things that we would have looked at over the last year would obviously be the amalgamation of the social services sector. And this is something that has been discussed for a long time. In fact, the first report that I saw on file was for 1997 with the Roet report. There were reports in 2004 from the Ministry of Social Transformation, 2007 from the then Bureau of Social Policy. There was a whole ministry committed to family under the former administration. There is no, sir, a 2020-2021 version of the restructuring of the social services. So this has been across decades, really, and across directorates, sir, and it is something that we will seek to do during the course of this year to be able to better offer social services to people, to bring those services closer to them, to make sure that we not only offer the protection, but that we give people opportunities for them to advance, sir. And the commitment of the staff in this process is remarkable, because so far most of the work that has been done in this process has been done by the persons who are sitting here, who are eagerly involved in the restructuring of the ministry. We also had, sir, a responsibility for dealing with COVID and other events, sir. It would be of interest for you to note that in 2020 alone, there were about 4,000 care packages prepared by the ministry, costing about $350,000. And that in 2021, there were about 60,000 care packages costing the government of Barbados about $8.6 million, sir. So the ministry was very much involved in making sure that those at the bottom were able to have food, sir, to be able to survive, sir, in the most basic sense at a time when they needed it most. At present, we still continue to deal with persons who were affected by Hurricane Elsa. It continues to be our responsibility. There are now 280 persons in accommodation. There are 39 properties that are being used. We have about 46 or so persons, I think, who are now outstanding. To deal with these, of course, we will need also to be able to budget for that in the coming financial year. But the ministry took very seriously to its role in helping people in very difficult circumstances. We're also proud of the work that was done in establishing the People's Assemblies, and hopefully we can have much more conversation on that during the course of this conversation. And certainly Barbadians will be able to hear the plans for the People's Assemblies over the next few months. There's been tremendous work in child protection and work also in aging and elderly affairs. So I'm also very proud of the partnerships with the international agencies. I feel very strongly that partnerships will be the way forward. A lot of the work that we need to do, we can do with the support, technical and financial, of these international agencies that would allow us, sir, not to reinvent the wheel, but to be able to better deliver goods and services to people in this country. Very quickly, sir, as I close, I look at some of the agencies and the work that they have done. Sir, the Child Care Board continued to, even during COVID, at a time when many other places were closed or persons were afraid, sir, the Child Care Board continued to offer services. I commend the officers, the men and women who work in the Child Care Board, the unsung heroes. For the most part, most of the persons here in the social services sector who worked very diligently during COVID, sir. We note that in today's paper, there is a report on the increase in neglect. We caution, sir, it's been my advice that as children return to school and begin to talk to each other and share stories. We could also hear of increasing stories of abuse as children report to other children some of the incidences in their life, and so we are prepared for that going forward. The role of the Gender Bureau, sir, must be expanded. I commend them for taking their role to the NGOs and to the private sector for the first time, but I also feel it has to be expanded and increased and deepened to be able to offer better services. The National Disabilities Unit, with responsibility for persons with disabilities, continue to do very good work. I feel as if our society, though, is not yet fully in tune with a fully accessible Barbados and what that means. And so I have asked for a much larger conversation working with the council to make sure that the disabled community is well treated too in Barbados. I should also tell you, sir, that we've seen an increase in the number of prostheses being offered by the ministry. Last year, the prior, there were 46. Thus far, there are 62 prostheses, and these are caused by, as you know, sir, NCDs. One cause. There's been an increase in violence, so from gunshots and so on. That's the second cause. And then the third cause, sir, relates to accidents, vehicular accidents, and so on, sir. So there's been an increase in the amount of prostheses required, and we will continue to look at this, but the issues of NCDs, certainly, and violence, sir, are some things that we must speak to very seriously as we go forward. The Strengthening Human and Social Development Department, sir, has done tremendous work working with 250 households. I sense that this is the kind of model that the ministry must now have, where you work as a whole to be able to move people not only at the lowest end, but to move them to economic empowerment. But I also feel that we have to be harsh in our judgment in terms of our outcomes, so that when we say we have done a thing, it means that we have done that thing. And so we have to evaluate what we consider to be our success stories. So the Welfare Department has performed exceedingly well in very difficult circumstances. The client to staff ratio is ridiculous. Way exceeds what is the internationally acceptable standard. But nonetheless, the staff has performed credibly. The current situation, as I would have spoken to before, is that our monthly expenditure is now almost close to what our yearly expenditure used to be in this department, but they continue to work, and I do hope we can have a real conversation this morning around welfare and around the role that it must play. But I also feel that in moving toward empowering this ministry and empowering Barbadians, we not only have to change the name of the Welfare Department, we have to change its focus. We have to be able to bring people, sir, not to receive the minimum, but to receive a big bounty from the entire ministry. I do know that there have been some complaints, and in the ministry, we've discussed them honestly, and the members of the public of Barbados can look forward to hopefully better servicing coming not only from welfare, but the entire social services department. But I ask persons to understand just the weight that is brought to bear on this department. The HIV Commission, sir, I've also asked for them to be more engaged. I mean, we had COVID over the last 2 years, and it has taken primacy in the minds of most people, but HIV is still real, AIDS is still real, and we have to, again, expand that program so Barbadians have it at the forefront of their consciousness. So, sir, lastly, entirely, sir, there is in the ministry now a need for a change management as we move toward restructuring the ministry to be able to offer better goods and services to people and to bring those services closer to the people. We also look forward to retooling the staff to be better able to deliver what I believe must be the new vision of the ministry that I have the privilege to lead. The ratio that I spoke to, the client to social worker ratio, we must find a way to adjust it. It just can't continue. Whether that means we work with NGOs better, whether we work with persons in the private sector better, whether we work with the international community that has been such a great partner to us, but this ratio has to be adjusted. It cannot continue as is. And then finally, sir, we have to just reorient our minds to what it means to be in this ministry and to be able to offer empowering services beyond protection, and we have to reorient the minds of the public, sir. I believe that this ministry, sir, will do tremendous service over the next few years, that this is going to be a new deal, and that Barbadians can look forward to the continued protection and more from the Ministry of People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs. Sir, with those few words, I ask that Head 35 stand part.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And first, let me join with the member for St. Michael South and commending the member for St. Thomas, who did an absolutely tremendous job heading that ministry and all of the social services, all of the work she did with the care packages, housing people for the hurricane and freak storm, and giving tremendous service over that 3.5-year time to the people of Barbados. And the people of Barbados will forever be indebted to the member for St. Thomas and all the work that she has done. And you know, Speaker, it is in her DNA to be able to provide that tremendous service, and she's done it all of her career, and I want to thank her for
on
that.
a point of order, Mr. Chairman, I just interrupt the honourable member with the greatest possible reluctance to correct the figure. I think he said 65. I believe it is more accurate to say 85,000 care packages.
I am so guided. 85,000. Tremendous. What I want to zero in on, however, Mr. Chairman, and by extension to the minister and to his PS and his team, and it relates to the rent that is paid to landlords. I have a great concern about this because many times we meet people who tell us that they've been to the welfare department. The welfare department is prepared to assist them with a rent because they can't find housing, and housing is a big problem, and we have to accept that housing is a problem for us in this country. And they want to get a rental accommodation with a landlord, but they cannot find an amenable landlord to be able to, that will accept the welfare payment. And part of this is because all of the landlords out there, I'm told, know full well that they will get paid, but the welfare department takes time, a long time to pay them. In some instances, some people complain that it takes 3 months, 4 months to get that welfare check. I'm told that they don't pay first and last, and there's another aspect of it that we have to work on. And then the quantum that the welfare is prepared to pay, because that 800 was set many years ago. Unfortunately, now the average rent for a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment, let's say, is in the $1,000 range. So I want to know what plans are being made to address this issue, because the country cannot house everybody. The National Housing Corporation, whether we like it or not, cannot build fast enough to house everybody. And we have to have the cooperation of the private sector. But we have to make it attractive for private sector people to be involved in these services. And it's not only Barbados, all over the world. There's something called Section 8 people in the United States, where landlords provide rent support and that provide housing for people who need welfare housing. So I'm going to ask the minister or his PS to be able to advise, what are we going to do to be able to solve this problem to help house and pay rental for the people of Barbados?
Minister, thank you very much for the question. And I will say a few words, and then the PS and or the Chief Welfare Officer will comment thereafter. This issue has occupied my interest as both Minister now and as an MP. Like all of you, I've sent persons to the Welfare Department or to the Ministry to be able to receive some assistance, especially with housing, and that has proven to be difficult. The challenge, as you so rightly stated, well, there are a few. The $800 that we normally offer to be able to assist persons is not necessarily the highest, and therefore some people would not be inclined to accept $800. If we are being very honest, there are some landlords who just do not wish to deal with clients who they believe came from the welfare department, who they believe will have many children or will wreck their place, and they have just bluntly refused to deal with the welfare department in relation to that. That's why I think we need to change the name and to rebrand the ministry. I also think that the $800 hopefully can bring a pay for the cabinet, and given your exuberance, your support when we asked to raise these monies to perhaps a little bit higher. But there's also an underground economy in Barbados that has allowed Barbadians to live for years. This idea that we could go to somebody else's house, you pay a little rent, and so on. But now, because of the way that a mature, modern Barbados must function, so I'm not blaming the current system, but now you must have a TAMIS number. You must be able to prove that you are legally the landlord, so you must be able to have some papers. Oftentimes, persons do not have the papers, and they do not wish to have a TAMIS number. So a lot of the houses that would have been available in the underground economy are now no longer available in the more legitimate structure of things. And then, of course, we've also had conversations in relation to the speeding up of the late payments. We've forwarded the idea of advance payments. It is something that I hope we can have further ventilation on. There's also, lastly, some decisions sometimes are made outside of the welfare department or outside of the ministry, and then the ministry finds itself in a position where it is playing catch up to be able to pay these rents, and we're not aware in the first place that some of these deals were struck. But I agree with you fundamentally that it is a challenge that we must face and fix. I also say to you that it is not only a private sector problem. It would be nice that if there were 2 or 3 houses available also at the NHC. The NHC has also been unable to assist with providing 2 or 3 units for persons, so it is a private sector and a public sector housing challenge for us. But I will ask the Permanent Secretary to speak in greater detail in relation to this matter, but rest assured, sir, that it has the full attention of myself and the PARSEC.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning. My name is Gabrielle Springer. I'm Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs. Thank you, Minister Duguid, for raising this issue. We recognize that it is an issue, and as we work towards restructuring and reforming the ministry, we hope to take into consideration matters such as deposits. We have a pilot system in the ministry now that we are working as we help persons who would have been displaced by ELSA. So the system that we are working with in the ministry accepts deposits. The rent is market standard, and we do property reviews. So property reviews means that we go, a specialized team goes out and they conduct inspections, and such issues such as appropriate building standards, town planning approvals, environmental health, fire and safety are looked at. So this system that we are working with as it relates to persons that we are housing as a result of ELSA, it has worked, it seems to be working well. We work with the Ministry of Housing to develop the tenancy agreement and so on. So as this has worked, we are hoping that as we work towards the reformation of the ministry, that this sort of system can be employed. I also believe the minister mentioned an underground economy. I also believe that we need to work with relevant entities across government, the NGO sector, civil society, and private sector to help to bring these persons who have properties that might be substandard at this point in time up to standard, so they could be part of the formal economy. So from a futuristic perspective, that's what we hope to do. Perhaps look at how we can start this system in the welfare department over this financial year with the ministers and cabinet's approval. But what I will do at this point in time is hand over to Ms. Deborah Norville, Chief Welfare Officer, who will share with you what we currently do and how we try to our best to manage the payments, landlords, and so on. Thank you. I'll hand over to Ms. Norville at this point in time.
Thank you, PS. Good morning, everyone. There really isn't much for me to add. Minister Humphrey and yourself did a very good job in explaining the challenges.
Madam Chief, we would ask that you introduce yourself to your name and your position, and this would follow for everyone else. Before you speak, please kindly be reminded that you should introduce yourself. Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman. Good morning, Deborah Norville, Chief Welfare Officer, Welfare Department. I was basically saying that there really isn't much more for me to add. Minister Humphrey and PS Springer did a very good job in explaining the challenges. what I would say in terms of the process, and we have to remember that it is a process. People may come to the department and apply for rental assistance, and they believe it's just automatic. But we have to do our due diligence. We have to visit the property to make sure that it is of good standard. We have to make sure that the landlord owns the property and is not leasing it. And we have to negotiate payment. Sometimes the client can pay part of the rent, and we would encourage them to do so. Sometimes we have to pay all of it. And I do agree that the $800 that we currently pay towards rent is insufficient. The rents that have been coming before us are $1,000, $1,200, $1,400, and that is not in our remit to pay at this time. I would also like to say, with regards to the landlords, like Minister Humphrey said, it is part of the current system, but our request for a TAMIS number is a great turnoff, because that means they're going to be in the system. That means they're going to be taxed. They also are very reluctant when large families come with lots of children. You would see ads in the paper now where they say no pets, no children. And that's challenging for us, because our clientele are usually, come from large families. So I do agree that we need to do better, and as a team, we can do so. The landlords also request a deposit, and that's not something that we currently do, but as Minister Humphrey says, that's something that we can look at going forward. And the late payments, there are different reasons for this. Sometimes with government, there's a cutoff period for that claim to be processed, and sometimes that claim doesn't reach us on time. Sometimes we have internal challenges with the bottlenecking and trying to get the invoices out. And sometimes there are other factors that would mitigate against us being able to, meet our obligations. And I think I'd leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that explanation. I'm happy to hear that things are being done, because I look forward to the day when irrespective of who the client is, a landlord would look at them equally. Because right now, from where I stand, it seems like the landlord looks at somebody coming from the welfare department as a second-class tenant or a second-rate tenant. And that should never be. It should be that a landlord should look at all tenants equally, because they can expect to be paid equally, and they can expect to get equal treatment as they would imagine, whether it be a private person or from a government entity. But I'm going to move off of that, because I think that what you've said has certainly offered a way forward, and I would hate to think that I have to come back next year, if you're in the well, and talk about this again, because I fully expect that this matter will be fixed appropriately. But I want to move to my last question has to do with the alternative care of the elderly. And again, a similar situation. The alternative care of the elderly was set up to be able to take some of the pressure off of the geriatric system, off of the facility there in Beckles Road. And what essentially is we brought in, again, private sector, because government can't do everything, to assist in providing care for the elderly, because we have a significant problem of people abandoning their elderly at the hospital. The cost of keeping somebody in a hospital bed versus the cost of paying for them per month at a private care of the elderly facility is much, much cheaper. So it made a lot of sense. Sadly, the cost of when it was set up, I think 7 or 8 years ago, has not changed. But the price of insurance, the price of food, the price of electricity, the price of water, the price of everything has changed. And I would like to see when we set up these prices, and it goes across government. When we set prices, it should really be an indexed price.
Honourable
unrelated.
member,
Yeah.
I would ask that you proceed, ask your question.
Yes. So the question is, the honourable member, the president is Mr. Chair. The question is, what is the ministry doing to be able to address the deficit of the alternative care of the elderly positions? Because there are many people who would like to get involved but have not gotten involved because the cost is not attractive at the present time.
Thank you again, Minister, for the question. It is also one that has, attracted my attention. I will say to you, as you will be aware, this is one of the manifesto promises of this current administration, so it has certainly caught the attention of all of us, and the need for us to be able to expand the alternative care program. For those who don't fully understand, this is where there is support offered to senior citizens' homes and nursing homes and so on, to be able to house some of the elderly persons in the private sector and therefore keep the tension and the burden off of the main Ministry of Health hospital. I should also say to you that this program, though it directly impacts on the elderly, is really a program that is situated in the Ministry of Health and Wellness and not necessarily with the ministry. But I do support your view that there is a need for us to be able to expand that program. We've seen the costings. I've even heard it described as elder abuse to leave persons in the hospitals, and therefore we know that there is a need for us to be able to offer these private accommodations. I am advised that the former minister, Minister Ford, would have met in relation to this matter with a strong view similar to yours. And again, I will ask the Permanent Secretary to shed further light on this situation. P.S. Springer, please.
Thank you, Minister. Gabrielle Springer, Permanent Secretary. Minister, I'm not sure there's much more I can add. As you said, this is a program which falls under the purview of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. The former minister would have met with the body, which is the overarching body for persons who offer these services. But I think what needs to happen as we go forward is that, and as we reach, hopefully, a tailoring off of COVID, that the two ministries work very, very closely together as it relates to care of the elderly. This ministry offers some services, but a lot of the services are also offered through the Ministry of Health. So it requires a synergistic, full collaborative approach, which involves both ministries. Indeed, this ministry is working with the Pan American Health Organization, which is a regional entity with responsibility for public health. In terms of, we are reviewing, and we are doing this in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, our existing policies, our existing structures as it relates to the care of the elderly. And so far, we have a situation analysis, so we have a fairly good sense of what is out there. Our next stage is to work with PAHO and the Ministry of Health to develop a robust and relevant policy for the elderly. As we know, Barbados has an inverted population pyramid now with several hundreds, thousands of persons who fall in the over 60 age bracket. So we have to look at the elderly in a completely different way, and there's a spectrum of care that can be offered. There are a whole range of activities that we need to look at. We need to look at intergenerational work as well, between the elderly and the youth. So there's a whole wealth of work that has been done in this area, and we need to continue, as we started, to work with the Ministry of Health and PAHO and other bodies to ensure that our elderly are well taken care of and are fully engaged as they move on in age.
Thank you very much, Minister and Permanent Secretary. I really appreciate that the work is done. But what is interesting is to me, it actually seems that maybe that department is better centered in the Ministry of Elder Affairs, rather than the Ministry of Health, and it's something that maybe the Prime Minister may have to look at. Because clearly the alternative care of the elderly is something better from in the Elder Affairs Department, and it's something we may have to look at. But thank you very much for your answer to both questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me congratulate the Honourable Minister and Parliamentary Secretary for the new positions. And I'm sure that just as you have both done well in your previous other fields, I certainly expect a similar energy being brought to this particular ministry. I would also like to join my other colleagues in congratulating as well former Minister and Member for St. Thomas, who I had the opportunity to work very closely with in relation to the issues related to Hurricane Elsa, the accommodation of several persons across the country, and also the very ambitious program that was undertaken by the government of Barbados to deal with the issue of care packages, 85,000 being given to vulnerable households across the entire length and breadth of Barbados. It was at that point, Mr. Chair, that I had the opportunity to really see the empathy in many respects that was meted out by a number of the senior level officers and other officers on the ground. Got a better opportunity to understand some of the challenges as well that were presenting the ministry. And as the minister spoke in his opening regarding the future of the welfare department, the future of the ministry generally, looking at a more social development approach, and also moving towards the amalgamation of social services, I just wondered whether he could speak a bit to the issue of decentralizing social services within communities. I think one of the challenges that we have right now is that everyone has to make their way essentially to Bridgetown. It obviously presents some challenges, especially when people are poor. They don't have access to a steady income. They're trying to get to various agencies, whether welfare or even trying to do the simple things of paying a light bill. And yes, we can all say there is technology to be able to do those things, but I think the reason why most people reach out in the first place is because they just don't have the resources, or in many cases they don't have the know-how as to how to go about doing those basic things. So I'm curious as to the plans for decentralizing these services, and what the future of the welfare department certainly will look like under this revised program. That's the first question.
Again, thank you so much, Minister, for your question. The consideration that must be given to community delivery of social services is one that is of extreme importance. I hold the view that even beyond the social services sector, that across the gamut of services that government offers to people, that those services must be made available at the community level. And were I to come close to home and look not at the social services sector specifically, but at the social sector, I feel the same way about our community centers, that they must be located in the community and be available to the community. And I know it is something that we're working to make sure that the centers are utilized for persons who reside in those communities. I feel the same way about schools on evenings, that they should be open for persons to have access to those schools. My view is very strong that communities must take ownership of these things, and that the only way they can do so is if they're genuinely brought into the sphere of influence so that they have a say in how these services are utilized. So fundamentally, my philosophical underpinning is one whereby the delivery at the community level is paramount. As it relates to the ministry specifically and the new department that we are hoping to be able to finalize, and I would like to think that within the next 6 months I can come back to the public after consultations with the public and speak in more direct terms about the establishment of this new department. But I feel as if the idea that you must now go to Child Care Board in Cheapside for child services, for the most part, welfare department in town, NDU there on close to Purity, I can't remember the name of that street. All these various places you must go in Column Rock. All these various places that you must go to be able to access services. Now, there are also some departments that are housed at different places. We would have visited a few. But yet, you can only get one service when you visit these departments. So you can never walk into one social service agency as it stands and be treated to the wide array of services that the department offers, that the ministry offers. And this is one of the things that we hope to be able to change, so that when we create this department, there are going to be satellite departments across Barbados, utilizing some of the existing buildings, perhaps being able to use some of the community centers and so on. But that you who live in the Pine, for those who reside in St. Michael South East, saying that is your question, Deputy Prime Minister, or in my constituency in Britain Hill, or the member for St. Michael South Central, if you are to go to an agency requiring services, and for the most part, when a person presents to a social service agency, even though they present with one issue, they have considerable exposure to other issues. So yes, you may present asking for assistance with a child abuse case, but it might be a case where you need assistance from welfare. It may be a case where you need support from the NDU. It may be a case where you need support from the HIV unit. It is just a wide array of services that must be available at one place. And so in our new understanding and our new expectation is that once you walk into the Department of Family Services, firstly, nobody knows why you're walking in. So no one can say you're walking in because you didn't pay your child support. If they see a man walk in, they don't say that there's anything associated with you needing national assistance. If you walk in, they don't know. And because the Welfare Department currently offers so many services, and people only think that it's NAB, national assistance, sorry. People only think it's national assistance, money or vouchers. The person may be coming for counseling for an issue that has very little to do with economic issues. So that when you walk into this department, nobody knows why you're walking in. And at that department, once you walk in and you present yourself, you then have the opportunity to be treated or to have your issues resolved as it relates to all of these various matters. And so the idea is that as you move into the communities, you don't have to go to town, you can have your services dealt with there. And if the issues are complex, because I also want to reiterate that we are not abandoning any of the services. The services offered for child protection and child care will remain. The services offered for national assistance will remain. But once you walk into this department, if it is a complex issue requiring more expertise, then you will be recommended to another level, whereby then you would probably be directed to the persons who are dealing with child care or the persons who are dealing with another issue. But for the most part, these simpler issues would be resolved at the community level. And therefore, I think this brings the services closer to people, both in figurative terms and in real terms. It brings the services closer to people. It allows persons to remain with a sense of dignity. It also reinforces our belief that government must offer decentralized services to persons. I suspect once this is properly implemented, as it must be, that it is going to be transformative and makes a significant difference to persons. It also reduces the level of duplication that currently exists. It also reduces the cost that exists. It also reduces the propensity for what we call agency shopping, where you can go to welfare to NAB. You come, they know. It obviously demands that we have a much more effective information system, and at some point during this conversation, one of the officers will speak to it. It demands that we have more relevant legislation. Our national assistance legislation, I think, is from the 60s, but it guides both it guides both NAB and welfare, and therefore it definitely needs to be revisited, and I do hope at some point in this conversation we can speak to that as well. But I suspect, Madam Deputy Prime Minister, that as we move forward, this ability to be able to offer services at the community level is going to be a marked difference between what currently exists and what we are hoping to be able to exist. It is also going to be marked by a relationship with other departments. So we must have a stronger relationship with the Ministry of Housing. As I speak more to the empowerment component of the new ministry, it must have a relationship with just labor, because there is an economic end to this ministry, one that I feel wasn't attended to as well as we probably could have over the last maybe 30 years, probably, but one that the circumstances and the exigencies of the time now dictate are necessary to happen. So those are just a few thoughts, Madam Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Minister. And through you as well, Mr. Chair, I thank the Minister for that intervention. I do agree with his latter point in particular that we have to work more closely across ministries as well, because there are a lot of interventions that are done whether at the schools and at the communities that require the additional support of a number of agencies. And certainly we need to ensure that there is that joint approach where there's perhaps more of a multidisciplinary team working to be able to find solutions to problems. Now, it also brings me to another question as it relates to the issue of the personnel that interfaces with your clients as well. And I'm sure each MP in here can perhaps testify to all of the complaints that we get from time to time in terms of how individuals have felt that they've been treated by officers. We often hear the concerns that people have tried to reach out to a particular officer. That officer is on leave, that officer is on vacation. Not that they're not supposed to take that, but at the same time, we're hopeful that someone will be taking up responsibility for their particular claim. Obviously, there's the issue as well of how people speak to people. And a lot of people who are already in a vulnerable situation, oftentimes report that there are concerns about how people make them feel within the welfare department. So I believe a large part of what we intend to do in terms of the reform also has to focus on the attitudes of officers and personnel in treating to the clientele that they are there to represent as well. Now, that is not to say that there are not some people who, as clients, present and make it very difficult for officers. As representatives, we all know how that goes. But at the same time, I do feel that especially when you have situations where people are not able or capable of representing themselves properly or expressing themselves properly, this is a skill that is required by those who are speaking to them, to instead of talking down to them or ignoring them, to perhaps try to get to the root of the problem. And so my follow-up question is, in the reform process, and certainly even before we start to roll out in another 6 months the full ambit of the new changes, what is the plan to address this general concern as it relates to officers not being reachable, persons not speaking to people appropriately? How are we going to deal with this so that people who have a challenge feel comfortable that they can actually reach out to an officer and have someone who empathizes on the other end of the line?
Madam Deputy Prime Minister, I do share your concern, and the Parliamentary Secretary will address this question, and thereafter any of the officers that I may choose.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues in the ministry, and good morning to my colleagues in the House and Barbadians watching local and abroad. Thank you again for the opportunity, Minister, to answer this. I think it's fortuitous that I be given the opportunity to speak to this because I have been known to speak on matters such as these before, particularly the treatment of persons requiring social services. I am happy to say that while I do hold some of the same views, being able to witness, tour, observe, be briefed on the other side of the story, I am very happy to report that as a ministry, we not only met, discussed, but we take the issue extremely serious, and we've already put a number of initiatives in place to improve the situation. All my MP colleagues will be happy to know that if you look through the estimates, you pay attention, you would see in the program that there is scope for training, continuous training. This is in technical, and also some customer service training. But more to that, you would have heard the minister speak to the issue of the ratio of the service provider to those requiring the service and the burden. And it is not an excuse, but it is for us to allow you to understand. So it's not an excuse, it's an explanation. One of the things not to turn it back on the DPM at all, or the PM, is that one of the things we need to look at across government, and this is not just within the services of the welfare social services, is the oversight and accountability when those in the public feel aggrieved by the issues of service provided to them by the government of Barbados. And this is something that I will be working with the ministry on and working with the government on. How do we understand that these are our clients, these are our customers, these are the people who we care for, and who we will want to treat in the way in which we will be treated. So I believe that increased accountability for all officers is something that the government needs to look at, and particularly within the ministry, I can assure you that we are looking also at caring for the caregiver. One of the things people don't recognize is because of that burden, after a while, as human beings, desensitization may step in and so on, and we need to give the people the vacation that the DPM spoke of so that they can come back to work refreshed. So I hope with that my colleagues understand that this ministry is taking the whole idea of treating persons with care very, very seriously, and we have initiatives in place to treat to them. Thank you.
DPM had also asked the PS to say a few remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. As both Minister and Parliament would have indicated, let me even go before that. The Welfare Department and this ministry have a continuous training program. So that's in place, but we intend to enhance that. So we intend to retool. We intend to, through training, not only through the Learning Directorate of Government, but through our international partnerships. Currently, the ministry partners with several of the United Nations bodies on a range of issues, and I can ask Mr. Pollard, our coordinator, who deals with international partnerships, to speak to that. So we have been receiving training, especially in the area of social protection. I think it is with the ILO, the International Labour Organization. What we've also done, and this was done a couple of years ago, we've ensured that the Welfare Department has within its budget funds that would cover the cost of a psychologist. A psychologist not for its clients, but for the staff. So the staff has free rein to see that psychologist if there are challenges, but not only for challenges. The staff can work with that psychologist to do debriefings. Many of you see the other side where you have clients and your clients are in need. And I appreciate that fully, because very often I'm on the receiving end of the requests from parliamentarians, so I understand the need. On the other hand, I also work with the Welfare Department. I've had staff meetings with the Welfare Department, and these officers say to me, PS, we are hurting. And I say to them, but I don't understand. What do you mean you're hurting? And they've explained the same thing the minister said. The industry standard for social worker to client is about 1 to 40 or 50. Is that correct? Right. And sometimes, like for example now, one welfare officer may be seeing hundreds of clients. So I'm not making any excuses, as Mr. Lane said. I'm seeking to explain so that you have a better picture of the other side. So sometimes, I remember one particular senior welfare officer said to me, PS, sometimes I'm on my phone and the second line is beeping, but I can't answer that because I'm in the middle of a very serious conversation with a client. Sometimes welfare officers, sometimes social workers in general, sometimes they are talking persons out of serious mental challenges. So if they put down the phone at that point in time to take a call, the situation may not end well. So this is not an excuse in any form. I understand, and I think the ministry generally understands that there's a need for improved service and so on, and we are going to do that. We're going to lean heavily on our international agencies, and I think there's a full-scale training program that we've submitted to the Learning Directorate of the Ministry of Public Service to have some training this year. The other area that I want to speak about, Minister, if you don't mind, is the issue of selection of staff as well as numbers. I think, and I'm saying this as a public servant, I think sometimes we need, the process needs to start when we select and how we select. So I believe in an agency such as what we are working towards, we have to select for attitude. So the person may not come with a master's in social work, if that exists, or a master's in psychology or something like that, one of the areas, but they may come with a phenomenal attitude. They may come with enormous empathy. And they may have the capacity because they may have a first degree, I don't know, in history or political science. So that means that they can then be trained to get that master's. They can then be trained in terms of the social work principles. And that's how I think that we need to go, because there are a lot of persons out there who are empathetic, who care, and have the potential to deliver excellent service. But they just need the social work training on top of that. So I see, as Permanent Secretary at this point in time with responsibility for this social service sector from social protection services, I see that we need to do a lot in terms of not only training, but in terms of the use of the taking care of persons' mental health. And we also have to work more closely with the Ministry of the Public Service in terms of selection of staff. So that's as much as I would say at this point in time, Minister.
And very quickly to end, and I endorse the comments of both of my colleagues, but very quickly to end, Madam Deputy Prime Minister, because I know that it is a concern of yours, you've raised it before, and I give you the honest assurance that that kind of behavior will not be condoned, and any reports of it will be treated very seriously. And while I recognize the caseload is burdensome, that I feel that as professionals, we must exhibit grace even in the midst of the fire. And therefore, that will not be condoned. I also know that sometimes it is not always the case that a person is treated badly all the time. Of course, sometimes it is. But it's very difficult sometimes to hear no as well. But I must tell you, too, that I chose a career in social policy. If I'm allowed to share a story very quickly, Mr. Chairman, in 1992, when there was a major restructuring program in government, my mother, then a conductress, was sent home. And she was sent home and was without employment. I hope she's not listening because she may not enjoy me telling her story, but she was sent home without any kind of financial support for years, so like 3 years or so, 4 years, and found herself going to welfare support at NHC, only to be told at the house visit that how could she be in need of support when her house has a TV and at that time a VCR and all these modern amenities. So the judgment was made on her circumstances without reflection of the fact that everything had changed. And so that kind of approach is obviously very difficult. It is a scar that obviously helped influence my decision to enter into social policy and to hopefully one day be involved in the social work sector. But I also caution, and I do so because I know everybody feel that there's a social worker. Everybody feel there's a social scientist. We have a lot of armchair social workers. We have a lot of armchair social scientists. You get a lot of respect as an accountant. You get a lot of respect as an economist. You're trained in that regard, and you have to respect the profession. I feel that social workers need to be respected, and I feel that we have to guard the profession, not necessarily to be able to allow everyone to enter it, but that the persons who are employed as social workers must behave in a professional manner and at all times conduct themselves with decency and probity, but to treat the people kindly and to show the kind of standard that they're trained to and that which they are capable of. So I caution as well anyone who would try to treat the people badly, but I would not wish to, unless it is absolutely necessary, to dilute the pool, because I feel that there are some necessary skills to be best able to deliver to the people of Barbados.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you also, Parliamentary Secretary and P.S. Springer. Let me just say that I have personally communicated with PS Springer in relation to several interventions. I have never had any issues whatsoever in bringing a quick resolution to any of the matters. My wider point, and I think the wider point of the colleagues, which I think all of you have addressed, is really just attitude. And I'm being given the assurance that it is noted and that there are things which obviously are in the pipeline for it to be done. I think perhaps the public might benefit from not just the estimates where we hear from you directly as to what some of the challenges are, but perhaps a public education campaign which also explains to people what resources are available, how to access them, and what to do if they find themselves in a vulnerable situation as well. So thank you for that clarity. My last point, so I can let my other colleagues also do some interventions, relates to the housing of the poor. I first encountered several issues in relation to the homeless as Minister of Education when we, about 2 years ago, when we were experiencing I think a storm approaching Barbados, and we were forced at the time, obviously with the ministry having responsibility for the shelters, to be able to look at shelters for housing the homeless. It was quite interesting because you became acutely aware of how many people out there were really homeless, and the necessary care that was necessary in terms, and the types of personnel that were necessary to obviously deal with a number of the homeless people, many of whom, some will have medical conditions, some will also have mental illnesses, and therefore it is not a straightforward way of just housing them in an ordinary shelter. At that time, I think it was the person who heads the Homeless and Vagrant Society that would have been responsible for dealing with that intervention. But I'm also mindful that, particularly during the COVID pandemic, that we've been faced with a situation where we are seeing more and more people becoming homeless, and not the traditional type of homeless people or the vagrants, as some people would refer to them, but we are actually seeing a lot more women and women with children entering the homeless shelters, and also not having the necessary support to be able to quickly address a number of the issues. I know this is something that certainly is engaging the attention of the ministry, but I think it would be important, perhaps, Minister, if we could just hear a bit about the plans from the ministry as it relates to dealing with this, because the incidence and the numbers are obviously on the increase, and therefore we need to be able to have some level of assurance that this is being given some high priority to help to integrate these people back into society, particularly women and children.
Again, thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister. The ministry, as you are aware, would be responsible for making sure that those who are most in need are able to access services, and housing being one, and of course the homeless being perhaps the most profound manifestation of somebody who is in need. One of the things that we did very early was to tour the properties under the National Assistance Board, who has responsibility for the most part for the elderly. I was very concerned about seeing the gaps in our service provision as they currently exist. I was also interested in seeing what we were doing, of course, but I wanted to see the gaps in terms of what I think we ought to be offering. On that tour, we would have visited the Barbados Alliance, I think, to End Homelessness, with Kimara Safri, and he would have taken us through what he offers. I know that the government currently offers some financial support to that association, I think of about $250,000 a year, and that the work that he is doing there is remarkable. The structure that he has in his institution is one I think that we could also replicate across some of ours, but I also feel we could lend support. It's not the duty of government, I think, to do everything at all times, but we must be able to facilitate the delivery of that service. So if it is being offered and better than we are doing so, then I think we should be able to work with the Alliance to be able to offer more, to be able to offer it wider across Barbados so that they can reach more people. We also visited the Clyde Gollop home shelter, and it used to be a day shelter, but now they allow people to stay in because of this very same reason, a 24-hour service, because persons find themselves homeless for various reasons. And there were several men that we spoke to during the time that we did our tour who would also need some support. And it is one of those areas where I think personally that there is a gap in our service provision. I take the point that we must do more and must do better. In the re-envision ministry, there's going to be a lot more effort being placed in dealing with homelessness. I think we have to work closer with our partners. We're going to need some support to be able to do so. I gave a comment the other day in relation to offering us potentially building a home for women who find themselves displaced and who, when we're looking at renovating Sterling, to be able to accommodate the persons who may be displaced with children. And there were tremendous comments and commentary on social media in relation to what are you going to do for men who also find themselves homeless. Suffice it to say that this is not a zero-sum game. You know, you don't help one group at the expense of another group. I think we have to help both. At the time I was speaking specifically to women with children. And I was speaking to Kimar in relation to the amount of persons who are homeless and the gender bias. And he's telling me he's seeing an emerging trend now of more and more women also on the street. In fact, we saw persons with children also on the street. So it is really something that we have to give much broader consideration to. It has to become one of the pillars, because if we don't address it, it is only going to increase. And I made the point, if you were to look at our social services in a linear fashion, only for analysis, because it's obviously not a linear progression, it's a lot more iterative than that. But if you looked at it as a linear progression, then you get to our departments almost at the end of the line. You know, by the time you've gotten homeless, so many institutions and people have either failed you in your, you know, or have let you down, or didn't work for you, or broke, or are broken. You know, families, the community, the wider society, the job market. All these things come into play in relation before someone gets homeless. So it is not, rectifying homelessness is not necessarily a social sector provision. It is a much larger provision of our wider society if you look at it holistically. So we must be able to offer better education, a better capacity to care at the community level, different outlets to allow people to go through challenges and still maintain themselves in the overall structure of things. But in our provision, for those who finally make it there, so I think we need to get that right, but for those who finally make it there where they need to interact with the social services sector, I still think that there is a gap, and that we need to accommodate those who find themselves there. I might be overly optimistic, Madam Deputy Prime Minister, but I hold the view that hopefully over the next few years, as we both have economic growth and proper social planning and proper social policy, that we are able to reduce those numbers. But as it stands, it is one of the areas where I feel we have to give much broader consideration. I should also tell you as I close that when I met with Mr. Safri, recognizing the work that he has done, I had asked him to come in and partner with the ministry in terms of one of our committees as we plan out for the way forward in relation to how we're going to offer services to the poor and to the homeless. And I'm happy to say that he has agreed. I am looking forward to having his counsel and his advice and to benefit from his experience. But I do believe that this is one of the areas where we absolutely have to do better. And I want to thank you, Madam Deputy Prime Minister, for raising it.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Just my final comment and closing comment. I totally support everything that you've said. I do feel that the ministry's energies now need to focus in particular on oversight, especially where there are entities out there, whether with the homeless shelter, whether with the elderly, providing the standards and providing the oversight where those persons can carry out the functions, especially if they're already actors in the environment. I think that would take a lot of the weight and the burden off of the existing officers who are, as the PS has said, are obviously struggling in relation to staffing and those types of concerns. But I think we have to now change a lot of the models, not just in this ministry, but across government as well. Those who are doing well, let us try to find a way to support them and provide the necessary oversight. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Michael, South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's so many areas and questions. First, let me join the others in acknowledging the contribution of the former minister, and also to acknowledge the new orientation of the ministry towards outcomes and towards reformulation for results. I have 3 or so questions. I will try to be succinct. I'm going to begin where Minister Yu left off in terms of being able to understand the how and the why and the approach, in particular with respect to evaluation. Evaluation in 2 regards. One question that I have is in particular with respect to the welfare department, and I look forward to the day when we can call that something else. But in particular with respect to the welfare department, the social protection benefits that are delivered, I really want to understand how decisions are made at the level of the individual and the household. I know that there's a proxy means test that is applied, which is a questionnaire, an instrument that has been developed as a first assessment to say whether we believe that these individuals require this support. But Minister, you've made a very important point, which is that the business of social protection is a life cycle issue. And I may be fine today and need support. That's why it's called a safety net, to catch me before I drop on the ground. I may be fine today and I may need support tomorrow. And just as you told the story of your mother, who one day found that she needed support but was assessed because she had a TV and other goods, was assessed to not be needing it, how do we ensure that those people get that support? So there's the issue of the proxy means test and how carefully that is applied. But the more immediate question is the reality that people fall on and off access to social protection benefits. You're accessing a benefit one day, you call to follow up with your officer to ask, well, what is happening? And you're told, oh, that's not, you don't get that anymore. There is, from my understanding, when I cross-examine the situation, very little explanation. There's no transparency or clarity about how that decision was made in this circumstance. One gets the impression that it was made by one person deciding on one day what they were able to or wanted to do. And it may be a resource issue, but there has to be transparency. So the question is, one, how are decisions made on a day-to-day basis? I'm not talking about the first administration of the proxy means test, but why do people fall off and in and out of access to a particular benefit? That's one. And then the evaluation from the point of how we assess somebody to be graduated. We are talking very glibly, I dare say, Minister, you and I have had this conversation, about this notion of graduation. As if because you give someone a basic income, because that's what it is, a lot of our programs, they help, but they don't solve. Because you give someone a basic income and you've moved that person to work, that person is magically in a better position. And it applies at the level of the country. And the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honourable Prime Minister, makes this point all the time, and this point must apply as well to the individual. Because how is it that a country like Barbados is deemed to be graduated, and we are middle to high income, and so that means that we never need support even when we have a hurricane? The same has to be applied to the level of the individual. And so you get access to a job and now you're graduated. And this notion that you can graduate somebody and you snap your finger and it's a miracle, it is a process. And we've seen examples where people that were meant to be graduated or that went into a program like the IC Bridge program that you had in the ministry that was supposed to graduate them are still experiencing the deprivations that we found them with. So this is an evaluation question, Minister. I'd be happy to hear from you and your officers.
Honourable Member, thank you so much for your question. You know, you and I share very similar opinions on a lot of these matters. As a development economist and as a social scientist, we've had these conversations, and so I am keen to hear the answer to your question. So I will ask the Chief Welfare Officer first to respond, and the Parliamentary Secretary thereafter, and the PS if she wishes to add as well.
Honourable Minister, before they proceed, I would want to say as well Very, very important question, and my ears are glued to the response as well. Thank you.
That's a very intimidating intervention, Mr. Chairman. You haven't said so all estimates.
Yes, hello again. No pressure, right? Well, let me first look at the process. We assess via, well, let me go back a little further. The National Assistance Act requires that all persons requesting welfare assistance must apply in writing and must undergo a socioeconomic assessment. And that socioeconomic assessment is done by a means testing. And we use, across the ministry, an instrument called Universal Intake Form. That form is very intrusive. It is meant to collect information on the individual themselves, the occupants of the household, to gauge family support, the health of the individuals in the household, can they work, are they disabled, the level of education in the household, so we can assess the skills and opportunity for training. When the officers complete the assessment, they would go to the senior welfare officers who would make the final decision. The client is then put on the register, whether it's for cash grant or food, and they go on with 2 dates, a review date and an inactivation date. And with all good intent, we hope to get to the clients at the time of the review before they can come off the system. The ratio of officer to client being 1 to 500, unfortunately, does not allow us to do that. So what we've been doing, and I would say we've been doing this for the past 2 years now, is rolling over clients, especially those with disabilities, women with children, well, children in general, so that they don't fall off the register. It is not our intention to unceremoniously dump anybody off the register. We have serious challenges, and it is to understand that it is a process that we must go through. I'm hoping that with the amalgamation, we can share this burden among our partners so that it is not just one entity that has to do all these assessments and slow down the process. I don't know if I've answered your question, but if you have a follow-up, I would be glad to address it.
Minister, before you come back, I'd let the Parliament speak, and then I know you must have a follow-up, so I'll let the Parliament speak, and then the PS, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Minister. I enter with the intentions of making it clear in relation to understanding my colleague's question and also concern. From the Adult Family Program is the angle I'd like to speak on, because I know a number of the colleagues reached out to me, having people dropped off unceremoniously, as they put it. And I'd like to first start by saying that it is ridiculous that persons are expecting assistance one day and the next day they're just not receiving it. From my experience, I can tell you there are a number of reasons for that. And sometimes it's basically because a lot of people are not tuned in to what's happening in the society. So for instance, with the Adult Family Program, I can tell you that there was a re-registration done, for example, last year, April, and the Household Mitigation Unit tried everything possible. They tried social media, they would have tried calling, emailing, WhatsApping. I think the only thing we didn't use was smoke signals. But at the end of the day, there were still about 1,000 people who still did not get the message. The only message they got was that the assistance has stopped when they realized they were not receiving it anymore. So I think in relation to creating platforms that we can communicate with the public more effectively, I think that's one of the things we need to look at. We talk about client ratios, and I can tell you that in the full analysis of the program, over 18,000 people sought to get on that particular program, whereas only about 9,000 would have met the criteria. It was also understood that about 4,000 of those 8,000 people would have received direct assistance, and about 8,000 would have received indirect assistance from the program. The other thing that we must understand is that because due to the criteria, things can change overnight. One of the things we recognize, and this point must be made, that every time we would have moved the curfew, a number of people went back to work or went back to full-time work. So they would no longer meet the criteria. But I do take the point that we've not done our best in relation to communication, and that was not anything intentional, but it just was not practical. So we have 5 people in the unit, and sometimes 3 of them will be out at any given time. And having 4,000 to 5,000 clients on how do you communicate with 1,000 people, as you have to recognize that they have gone back to work through the NIS or the welfare, any of the other agencies that provide information to ensure that clients meet the criteria. One of the things I've asked for is, again, that using the technology platform website so persons can actually go and check their status. Those are the sort of things that we have to use in this society to our advantage to be able to create platforms, to create a mechanism where we can communicate with our clients, our customers, our citizens, our constituents in a more real-time fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister and colleagues. I'm not going to belabor the issue, but I did not really get an answer in terms of how decisions are made to remove someone from a particular benefit. I appreciate the response from Mr. Lane in the case of the Household Mitigation Unit. But the final point I will make before we move to my second question is that I believe that if someone is being removed from access to a benefit, that process of decision-making and how that decision was reached has to be made clear and communicated to that individual so that it does not seem as if it is an individual decision, as if it is an ad hoc decision. It has to be, well, when an individual reaches a certain level of income, when an individual is working for a certain number of hours a week, or that the individual's household is accessing a certain level of income or another set of benefits, then that individual ceases to receive X or Y benefit. We have to treat people like human beings and communicate with them and not just say, this here in for you anymore. I move to my second question, Mr. Chair. It is related, and again, it comes to...
Can you hear me, Chair?
Sorry.
No, I find your point, Minister, to be so relevant, I wouldn't want you to move off of it, so without it being answered. And so I will try to perhaps get an answer for you. I do recall when I was Director of Social Policy, and we were evaluating the system. I don't know if your Chief Welfare Officer, if this has changed, but there used to be a point after 6 months, or there was a point where persons had to be reviewed. And if the person wasn't reviewed, then they would fall off the system. And at that time, this is before you were chief, but I don't know if it's changed, but at that time, then you'd have to go and manually put the person back on so that the person could continue to get a service. I know that there were cases where persons' circumstances would never improve, for people who were disabled in ways that would never allow them to be able to work, who also fell off, and then had to be manually, I think, almost put back onto the system. And at the time, the position that we took was that instead of having a city, considering your case load, which makes it almost impossible, really, to be able to get around to these persons in time, for persons to stay on the system and only at the end of the review to then be taken off, as opposed to an automatic being taken off automatically, staying on automatically, and taken off if you're reviewed. I want to know if that is the same system. I suspect that's where the minister is asking, like, what happens that a person is taken off? Is that the same case where after a few months a person is evaluated or should be evaluated and could just drop off of a computer system as opposed to the review? I'm asking that for the chief so that the chief could answer you, Minister.
Yes, I appreciate receiving an answer. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Minister. I think maybe the point was missed earlier when I said that to prevent those people from falling off the register, especially persons with disabilities or persons with HIV or with children, we have been rolling over those people. We've rolled over those people now for the past 2 years. So we've completely ignored review dates, inactivation dates, and have just allowed them to roll over and continue to get the assistance. Sometimes there are anomalies and somebody may fall off, and then we would work diligently to try and get that person back on. But these clients falling off the system, as you're talking about, that should not be happening as frequently as before.
Thank you, Chief. I suspect that we will return to this issue with the Minister because I do think that there is ample space here to resolve this issue. But I will move on. On a related question. Now, I know that the Ministry is working to reformulate the way it organizes for delivery. But I want to ask a question that may be a little bit, I don't want to say complex, but there are certain ways in which that reorganization can take place. In 2010, I was asked by the World Bank and the UN system to carry out a social expenditure analysis for Barbados. And that, one of the recommendations that was made by the consultant at the time, was that Barbados follow the rest of the region, at least, in bringing in a central beneficiary register or registry, which would be really a kind of, I don't like to use management information system, but it allows you to have a platform where any individual accessing any of the services from the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs would be registered, would have a particular number, would also have a client number that they can go on, and I mean, there are lots of different functionalities. But it is to just have a central beneficiary register so that, as you intimated earlier, Minister, we have this notion, I believe, that if a person is getting a uniform grant and they're also getting a food voucher and they're also getting participating in an active labor market program, that they're getting a lot of things, right? They're getting enough, they're getting too much. As if one cannot at the same time require to send school their children and to eat and to work. And the central beneficiary register, therefore, then allows you to be able to monitor and continuously evaluate the kinds of services that that person requires and is accessing and so on. There's also, and I'll try and be succinct, Mr. Chair, there's also the issue of the use of a conditional cash transfer, which may become more relevant for the ministry now. I will say that philosophically, I've always been opposed to conditionality attaching to social protection benefits, except in the case where there are multiple issues confronting us at the same time. I'll give you one quick example. The issue of health and wellness and being an active participant in your own health. Making sure that the kinds of activities in which you've engaged, this was something that was in that was proposed as a policy back in 2018 by this administration, to be able to, what we call, give wealth for health, so that you reward certain health-giving behavior, certain behavior like diet and exercise, and the possibility of linking certain behaviors to access to social protection benefits. I'm asking these things because I want to know the following. One, you may not think this question is coming, but one, what is the timeline for this reorganized ministry and this reorganization for better delivery? When can we expect all of these things that we're discussing to be rolled out to the people of Barbados? But two, what are the transformational things that are going to be applied? Are we going to move from universality to conditional cash transfers so that we hold people accountable for certain kinds of outcomes if they're accessing the system? Are you going to be having a central beneficiary register? Are you going to be using referral services so that if the police encounter a child in need, there is an immediate way to refer that child to the child care board without having to go and make 10,000 calls? What are we going to see delivered? What are the new things that are going to transform? And when are we going to expect it? Should we expect it?
Thank you, Minister. I will ask Mr. Andrew Pollard to speak to this and to identify himself and his role before he so addresses the question.
Good morning, honorable members. Andrew Pollard, Coordinator, Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, particularly focusing on social protection and social protection system. What the member is speaking about is indeed correct and interesting. At this point, the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, we are in discussions with the UWI. Actually, it's more than discussions. We are working with them to develop a geomapping application which will recognize the vulnerable persons where they live and also consider their situations. In addition to that, though, the Strengthening Human and Social Development Program project, they are working with consultants at present to establish a management information system. That management information system will feed nicely into the same beneficiaries register you are speaking about, honorable member, and it is more or less at an advanced stage. We anticipate that it will be concluded sometime in August. We've already tested some departments and such like. In addition to that too, what we are doing, we developed a application form online for the welfare department, and we found that that has been somewhat successful, at least in persons making application. The last count I had in that database was 12,000 applications. Now, granted, some of these are repeats, and obviously some are new. But upon that, we can build our base. We've also been seeking to get information, and we've also accessed information from the other agencies within the four that will be amalgamated, which are the National Assistance Board, the National Disabilities Unit, the Child Care Board, and the Welfare Department. So that geomapping that the UWA consultants are working on, so that geomapping, they received a full list of all of the clients for those 4 departments. And that has gone into the database, and that will form, as it were, the basis of the beneficiaries register. In addition to that, we started a contract with Intrinsic, a company called Intrinsic. They are developing a directory of services where we will also ask people to sign on, and we will seek to have an application for the ministry services on that particular website. So I recognize your question, honorable member, and I know you know what you're talking about. So yes, we are in fact trending very seriously towards establishing a beneficiaries register. And I dare say that with the information we've passed to the UWI, we can start. Where the gap comes is where it is not online, and where each agency cannot access that information in a just-in-time or ready-to-use situation, except maybe sent by email or something like that. But I think even in saying that, we are not far from that either, because with the capability for remote access, heads of departments can easily access our servers to get the information. The main thing is the effort and the time, and we are making the effort. We just need the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pollard. I have one final question for the Minister.
No, let me also add before.
sorry.
Is that okay? Let me also add, Minister, because I note your question. And I think we are going to have to get to the point where we discuss whether the majority or all or a limited amount of our services are going to be conditional, or whether we're going to continue with, because that's pretty much what we have, an unconditional transfer at the moment. What is going to be the mixture? And what is going to be the modality of delivery? I feel, however, and I think we need to get there, and that's a conversation we need to have, and to be able to resolve that in the very short term as well. But I see us having challenges, Minister, if I'm being very truthful, that would affect whether we go conditional or unconditional. And that the success of our policy choices do not necessarily only depend on the modality that we choose, but on the systems that surround those modalities, the personnel, the skills. Because you would appreciate, I'm sure you know, that to implement a conditional cash transfer system, if it is going to be successful, will require not only proper implementation, proper monitoring, proper evaluation as well. And so it adds a responsibility on the ministry side that I feel we have to be able to strengthen, even as we attempt to move toward better targeting. So yes, I suspect that there needs to be a better balance and understand as to why some may be unconditional and so why some would be conditional cash transfers. I think the policy implications, the evidence sometimes may be a little bit, you're never really sure if people support overall unconditional or conditional. But I think in our circumstances, we have to be very clear about the choices we make. But I feel as if fundamental to the ministry's capacity to be able to offer those services is the need for us to get better at doing the monitoring, at doing the evaluation, at doing the long-term tracer studies, at knowing whether these things work, at not just counting actions or costing outputs, but looking at real outcomes and real results. And that is a systemic change that I feel is necessary and will be necessary for any success, whether it is unconditional or conditional. But I take that point, Minister, and I do look forward to us being able to get there and to be able to deliver well, having done the internal diagnostic work that we must do first.
Thank you, Minister. You've gone straight to the point, which is, in a way, I feel as if perhaps the ministry should be, I don't want to say forced, but should be nudged in the direction of strengthening its evaluation, not simply saying we are going to train people to better relate to clients, not just saying we have a project called this with this institution, but how is it changing people's lives? It is the point of this work to be able to understand the impact on people, and I fear that we do not know it. We know that we are spending, we know that we are giving transfers, and we know that our level of social spending is actually possibly above average on social protection for this region. So the question is not that we're not spending enough, but the question is how is it affecting people? And the ministry, I dare say, needs to be able to answer that question. So I thank you for answering the question that way. Finally, I'm looking at your program 632, subprogram 438, which relates to the Bureau of Gender Affairs. And I've been looking as well at the part of the program, your program document, which addresses the things that these resources are meant to deliver. Minister, I have a concern. I have a concern that on the question of gender equity and gender equality, that most of what the ministry is proposing to deliver is process-oriented and event-oriented. I see reference to 16 days of activism, which is an important thing, International Men's Day. I see reference to advisory councils. I see reference to national policies. I see very little reference to results. What is it that we want to see accomplished with respect to gender equity and gender equality in this country. Having had a national policy on gender since, 2016? What are we saying that we are delivering? I hear, for example, more recently, and Minister, you were involved in this conversation, a reference to we need to do X and Y for single mothers. And I would dare not disagree with that. But what is that based on? Is it a question of single mothers, or is it a question of the burden that custodial parents are facing in this country, whether they're single mothers or they're single fathers? Where is the gender analysis across ministries and departments that is informing policy? Where is the clear response on gender-based violence in this country? I run the risk, Minister, of I do not want to offend anyone. I know that there is a resource issue. There has always been a resource issue when it comes to what we call national women's machineries or bureaus of gender affairs or women's departments, not just in this country, but all across the world. So my question does not suppose that I don't understand that that resource question is real. I see that there are transfers to NGOs and so on, but I want to hear from you, Minister. What is it that we are saying that we are going to deliver as a government on gender? Barbados has been a pioneer in this field and has been part of this Caribbean region that has been a pioneer in this field. Starting with sexual and reproductive rights for women, I can go on and on. But I feel slightly embarrassed. As someone who has started my career in the area of feminist economics and what it means to be a woman and have to access resources, Mr. Chairman, I see you fidgeting with the microphone. I will wrap up shortly.
Please do, Honourable Member.
But I want to hear what is the plan. Because if it were up to me, every ministry and department would have to bring a gender equity statement when it comes to estimates and say, what is your ministry delivering? How will it impact men and women differently? Just as they would have to bring a climate response statement to say, how is your program addressing the climate crisis if it is an infrastructure ministry? We have to take it seriously, and I want to hear how this ministry plans to take it seriously.
Minister, I would let the head of the Gender Bureau speak to this, please.
Good morning, Ministers. I'm Patricia Boyce, Director, Bureau of Gender Affairs. Minister, in response to your question, there are a number of initiatives that we have started and that we will continue in this new financial year. First, we have been trying to have a number of focal points throughout the various ministries. We started that process early in 2000. We are in the process of working with UN Women to have a discussion with our permanent secretaries across ministries. What we are hoping to achieve from that is to have 2 focal points identified for training, and this training will be provided by UN Women, and the output from that training will be to help development of more gender-aware policies coming from the departments. What we're also doing, we had some training sessions with our senior teams in our ministry, looking at the institutional arrangements that are needed to transform the departments in our current ministry. This was done by UNDP. We are also, in terms of the amalgamation, we are looking at a gender data strategy where we would have persons look at how they are operating, what is needed to ensure that they reach the identified targets that the resources are meant for, to look at what are the challenges that those persons are encountering. That is in terms of the mainstreaming of the gender at this point. In terms of the national policy, we have recently brought on a consultant to update and review the national policy on gender. That review has been completed and is in the ministry for review. We have incorporated aspects of climate change into that document because that was something that was missing from the previous document, and we are hoping that come early next year that this new policy, this draft policy would be adopted by Barbados. It looks at the gaps that are that we are currently facing in terms of women and children and men. So we're trying to close that gender gap.
So, Minister, I note your question, and I understand very well your concern. And to what extent are we just doing things, right? Like, are we just doing things? Are we just engaging in different things? What is it that is influencing our policy position? Why haven't we mainstreamed gender better? What, if any, is the knowledge gap in understanding these gender issues? Do we have a proper understanding of what may be the inequitable distribution of resources between men and women in Barbados? And has our policy position been influenced by this understanding? And therefore, the things that we are doing are real. To what extent have we located the necessity to have gender mainstream throughout the service and throughout Barbados? So that different, as you said, I thought you answered your question almost at the end in relation to having different departments also present on what they're doing on gender. But I think to get there, we have to give them the knowledge so that the programs that they too attempt to implement are based in some local understanding of things. And then, given all that we know, how do we then shape these things in a real way so that, you know, we speak of the advancement for women, our capacity as a country, long before many others, to be doing things in health for women. What are the new areas, right? Like, where are we not talking about, what has the research in health, for example, said to us about female-related cancers or male-related cancers, and how are we treating to these things? What is the knowledge that we are using to be able to make these decisions? And are we being superfluous in our positioning? Is our policies and our programs as a result not profound enough to be of real significance? So these are meaningful things, and the truth is, Minister, beyond, for the last few years, I think, regrettably, we haven't been able to elevate a gender conversation to the level that it needs to be elevated to. We haven't been able to treat to these issues, I think, across the board, because it really has to be across the board. I think even as I spoke, and I hear you and I take your point, even as we spoke about the work at Sterling, that was in relation to the evidence of the number of young women coming forward with children and not necessarily young men. But does that mean there are no men? Which is, I think, so is that understanding that I don't think that we've properly communicated, perhaps because we probably don't have it all. And then there is a need for us to do some honest introspection and to attempt to be in a position, an informed position on these gender issues, and not just be driven by a need for us to do things. So I take the point, and hopefully when we come back to you in a year, that we are in a better position to be able to answer what I think are very important questions.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate that you seem to have a very good understanding of what needs to be done, and so I look forward. I hope it will not take a year. The only thing I will say is that we've been gender mainstreaming for 20 years, and it is not rocket science. The four-question approach, the first principles approach that we've been using, what is the public interest, what is the public mischief, can technology give us the results that we want? And the last question is your money question, Minister. What is the group, or what are the groups that are going to be disadvantaged or affected differently by this policy? You sit in cabinet, I propose to you, and you apply that framework, in particular on gender, and you will have your policy mainstreamed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Peter. Peter. Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Peter. Honourable Member for St. Peter. Peter. Thank you, 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 Honourable Member for St. Peter. Peter. Than
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I proposed to ask a question on gender as well, but I would not have been able to put it as well as the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central. But I want to start, because the gist of my questions to you, Minister, and your ministry relate to the cross-cutting nature of the work that your ministry is involved in, and the absolute need for collaboration in a number of respects. But from the gender perspective, I fully agree, and if I may probably make the comment before I ask the question, that we have to be clear as to what it is we want as the outcome, what are the issues that we are addressing, as opposed to doing things because there is an international day allocated or there is something that has been offered to us. And I would want, by way of information, just to indicate as an example, from my ministry's perspective, there is a challenge based on all the information that we have of gender-based violence in the workplace. And so the ministry that I have the honor to lead has to address that specific issue. So our programs can't be pro forma. They have to be aimed at reducing. The outcome has to be definite, and it has to be that we need to stop men, and it is particularly men abusing women as opposed to women abusing men, and that is what we have to address. Sometimes those are difficult things to talk about publicly because, as you know, Minister, I think you mentioned it this morning, you mentioned women, and then somebody sends the question, what about the men? We are big people, and we just got to respond. More men beating and abusing women than women beating and abusing men, so we have to address the issue, even though it will be, but let me not get too emotional about that. I do, because in 2019 at the ILO, I heard the PS mention the ILO, I led the charge to implement the new Violence and Harassment Convention. And we had to fight to get in the phrase, including gender-based violence and harassment. We had to fight parts of the world to get that done. But we prevailed, because I believe that good eventually will prevail. And so I look forward, like the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central, to specific concrete outcomes from our gender work. Because I sit in this place as representative for the people of St. Peter, who pay taxes either directly or indirectly, either through income taxes or through value-added tax, or the tax that is attached to fuel. And they have sent me here to make sure that the money that is spent is spent properly. And my constituency, like all others, have situations where people are being abused, where there are gender issues, and they want to know that those issues are being addressed. On the matter of the cross-cutting nature of the work of the ministry, I heard you, Minister, speak to, I gather from what you said earlier that you understand that there needs to be collaboration, and I heard specific mention to collaboration with the Ministry of Health. I would want to suggest that not just in gender, but across the spectrum of social protection, there has to be close collaboration between your ministry and, yes, health, but there's also ministries like the Ministry of Housing, the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of Responsibility for the Development Commissions, and of course, the ministry responsible for Social Security. And I'd be interested in hearing, Minister, what strategy, beyond what you have indicated earlier, well, earlier you spoke to the fact that we need a strategy, and I'm conscious of the fact that you've just taken up office. I just want to maybe pick your brain a bit to find out what is there in terms of what you expect, obviously from a policy perspective, since you're a policy lead, as that strategy that will embrace the cross-cutting nature of the mandate and reach out to the various government ministries, departments, and agencies to effectively execute that really, really significant and important mandate.
Minister, thank you very much. My staff would tell you that at all of the meetings that I've had so far, that I've said to them that our way forward must be as a collective. And that the only way we can achieve results, not for the ministry, but for the people and for Barbados, is if we operate as a country, as a government sometimes, but as in relation to the NGO movement, the private sector. There can be no room, I think, for egos. There can be very little room for beating your chest or trying to tick your own boxes, or we will not get where it is that we need to get. I hold the view that together, if we work well together, then we will be able to achieve some of these things. And so I've made it very clear that the approach that we will take is as a collective. That is why we visited so early some of the NGOs who are critical to the ministry, and we will continue to do so and to work with these persons in the various NGO sectors as well. I think we have to recognize fairly early that no man is an island. No ministry itself is attained, and none of us will be able to achieve results unless we work collectively to be able to do so. I know there are a number of committees that the ministry is involved in. One I know is also in your ministry. I've also given the assurance that we will work closer. The ministry that I lead is deputy chair of that committee. We will treat to that committee with greater seriousness. There are a number of other committees on which we serve to be able to give input on a number of these issues. Look, people's empowerment, in my mind, is not about the social services sector alone. People empowerment, in my mind, is not about the delivery of welfare or national assistance or HIV mandate alone, in my mind. People empowerment, in its true experience, must be about a wide variety of things. And so I have made the point in the ministry, I've made it before as well, that you're going to hear the ministry's voice in relation to all these matters, in relation to housing, in relation to health, I mean, in relation to everything, because invariably everything is about people's empowerment. And so you're going to see now a reorientation of the way that we approach a lot of these matters. You're going to see us inserting ourselves in affairs that previously we were not necessarily involved in. You're going to see me inviting other people to sit at the table. The table is big enough. We live in a virtual space. The table is limitless, really. And so having more people brought to the table to be involved in these matters, we also have to invite people with the know-how to be able to come and to evaluate that which we are doing so that it could submit itself to some rigor and in the process become stronger for it, so that there cannot be a conversation siloed as we seek to hold on, the public service that I had been a part of for most of my career. I mean, I joined the government in '96 and left in 2014. Most of my official training is in the public service. I have a lot of respect for the public service and for public servants, but I also am well aware that we have a tendency to hold on to things. This is my space, and nobody else will be in my space. That has to change. And so we will subject ourselves to transparency and to rigor. When I was director of the Department of Constituency Empowerment, we had done, the chief welfare officer was also in the ministry at the time, the department at the time. We had done memos of understanding or agreement with various heads. So we had a relationship with housing, we had a relationship with all the various people that we thought would be necessary to be able to deliver constituency empowerment, right? So we sent the information forward, we had names given, but yet when we were to write these persons and ask for comment, or when we wrote and asked for people to attend meetings, or when we wrote and asked for preferential treatment, as we must, and I'm telling you, Minister, and all the ministers, that for us to experience true empowerment in this ministry, it will require that persons who are ministers of housing hear us, the people who are responsible for transport and works hear us, the people who are responsible for education and training and so on hear us, Because it is one thing for us to expose ourselves to that conversation where we invite other people to help us along, but then there's no response. And at that time, even though we reached out and tried to get some response, we hardly got any response going forward. So it has to be a much deeper relationship. The one that currently exists, I'm told, is we work a lot with health, education, with the police, and economic affairs, and that we also work with a number of agencies in the ministry already. And obviously, I know from my experience at childcare, there's been lots of relationship with various departments, of course, including the police, including probation, and so on. But that for this to have true and real meaning, it cannot be that people, just as I don't see it as a responsibility of the ministry alone, and I'm encouraging my officers not to see it as a responsibility of their departments alone, because I must also tell you, it's been my experience not only in this ministry, but in various ministries, what one department is doing in the same ministry, is unknown to another department in the same ministry. So there is a fundamental flaw in the way we execute projects, in the way we execute our mandate, and in the way we govern. And so I feel we have to peel back, Minister. I give you the assurance that as lead for the ministry, we will offer ourselves up, we will open up ourselves and allow people to come in and to see what we're doing. I hope when we establish these relationships with the other agencies that they are treated with the respect that they must be treated with, because if people only see this ministry as being responsible for social protection and not as an empowering agency that could potentially be part of the productive sector, Minister Cadell and I had this conversation. If people don't see us that way, they may not treat us that way. You know, I had the experience on becoming minister in an area that I... Yes, sir. Wrap up. Okay. I'm just saying all that to say, sir, that I heard the minister responsible for labor, and he has my complete and total assurance that we will work collectively.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Sorry, Minister.
Sorry.
So there was one other person who wanted to say something very quickly. I know he took up most of his time, but he just needs a minute.
Yeah, thanks for that, Minister. The Honourable Member for St. Peter, this is just to bring it home a little bit to ground level. I agree with what the Minister said in respect to how we interact with the other agencies and so on. But let me see if I can bring some solace to you by letting you know that within our ministry we have been working assiduously with the Ministry of Housing, as the former Minister of Housing would have alluded to. We are working with the Ministry of Education to get persons' electricity turned back on so that the children can go to school online. That may be a thing of the past now, let's hope. But at any rate, we are still working. We are working with the Ministry of Education on that. Well, our approach to poverty and poverty reduction is we see poverty as multidimensional, as you would have alluded to, and therefore from that perspective, we recognize that looking at the Strengthening Human and Social Development Project and the 7 pillars on which they operate, which is family and employment and health and so on, we recognize, yes, we must indeed interact with all of these ministries, all of these agencies, all of these organizations. And speaking of organizations, we are also interacting heavily with NGOs. So when we look at going forward, looking at the amalgamation of the social services, all of this will come into play. So I just want to assure you the process has already started, and I should also say we are interacting heavily with your ministry as well with respect to the European grant, social protection grant. So, yes, Minister, you are in your right in bringing that up so that it gives us the opportunity to really state what we are doing. And doubtlessly we'll be coming to your ministry some more for that heavy interaction our minister is speaking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister and Coordinator. And I'm aware of the the interaction, and the gist of my question acknowledges that there is need for that transactional, what I refer to as transactional interaction. I think we have to move toward a deepening of the interaction, and by deepening the interaction, I refer more so to coordination of policy so that we're going in the same direction alongside, but not alongside, because that needs to come actually before the transactional interactions. And in terms of the strengthening human and social development, I'm looking forward. Well, the IDB, you mentioned the EU program, but the IDB program is a little behind, and I'm looking forward to a more vigorous interaction that will allow us to meet the timeline for the disbursement so that we can help the people of the country. Now, the final related question that I have, related meaning along the same line of the collaborative approach to addressing social development. And I speak now specifically as Member of Parliament for the constituency of St. Peter. There seems, in my view, and I am speaking the way I am and trying to choose my words carefully because I could be 100% incorrect. But there seems to be, in my view, a hesitance in engaging in a full and direct manner with those of us who have been elected to represent the people in our constituencies. Now, I know that there are guidelines for everything. I'm wondering if there is any more scope in the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, which I really feel should be the Ministry of Social Development. I agree with you, Minister. Is there any scope within the ministry, within that kind of a construct, for fuller engagement with those who have been elected by the people to represent their interests? Because we know that while we are elected to represent in this honorable place, our people expect that we represent them in a variety of spaces and for a variety of causes. And I'm asking that question because I understand, I think it is in sub-program 423 as well, I don't remember the actual program under that, which speaks to people's assemblies and engaging at the constituency or engaging at a more local level. So the question, again, what scope is there for fuller engagement with the people's representatives in identifying needs and in fashioning solutions to those needs across this country?
Minister, the Parliamentary Secretary, and then the PS will respond.
Thank you. Let's cut to the chase. The reality is that there's no hesitancy. There's just practical reality. Now, you spoke about the whole idea of the guidelines, and that is true. And there's a saying that I love to state. We're made for us, and we were not made for guidelines, meaning that they can be adjusted. When I, as a new member of Parliament, looking in from the inside now, I recognize that there are some systems that we've adopted from decades, in some cases centuries ago, they're just not working for us. It is now our responsibility to adjust the suit, cut the cloth, to address the times that we are in. We are in one of the most difficult times, whether we realize it or not. And some of these things must be adjusted. Once we continue to follow the guidelines, the general orders, etc., or adjust them to suit, I believe that we can proceed from there. And that is one of my excitements, particularly where the people's assemblies are concerned, so that as MPs, as community groups, as NGOs, so on, we can work together with a whole of government approach and a whole of Barbados approach to get the systems that we need to assist the people that need the assistance and need it the most. I can tell you, working between MPs, working with the NGO, working with PMO and the HMU, that the reality is that sometimes, as Minister said, there are these silos where everybody is doing things in their own corner, everybody have these guidelines to meet, and at the end of the day, they become more stumbling blocks than agents of accountability. And we have to look at where the stumbling blocks are, where the pipes are clogged, and we have to unclog them, because at the end of the day, and to the right side of the equal sign, what is the results? What is it that we are going towards? So, Member of Parliament for St. Peter, I want to assure you that in collaboration with the Minister, that this ministry, and I believe the entire government, will be looking towards how do we work together more, the private sector, the public sector, the MPs. And one of the things I've been telling persons, I believe strongly that after an election, when you hear that you are declared a member, you are declared a member for the entire constituency, and that is what you have to do. We have to put politics aside, we have to put party politics aside, and recognize that we are the agents for our constituencies, we are the agents of Barbadians, and we have to get down to the work and do the work. And that can only be done if we create the guidelines, the platform, and the framework to do so. And I assure you that this ministry is committed to doing so.
Minister, I hope that the Parlsec has answered your query.
Yes, thanks very much. I look forward to the improved ease of the collaborative effort that I speak to, because we, as representatives of the people, share a common intention. I like the Parlsec's figure of speech. On the right side of the equal sign, we have the same goals in mind. We want the same thing on that right side. And I look forward to being able to do that in an easier manner than what appears to be the case at the moment. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the direction of your ministry, the execution of it.
Thank you, Minister.
Honourable Member for St. James Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You will forgive me if I do not allow myself to be lured into the mystification of this process. I'm not going to be on either the left side of the equal sign or the right side of the equal sign. I believe that we must treat to this opportunity entirely in the context of transparency of policy and certainty of incidence of the categories of expenditure. And I think that it is easier for people who are listening to us to relate to us in that way. The persons with disabilities being rolled over is a concept that caught my ear, and I'm sure, Minister, that it would have caught the ear of all of those who are listening in every constituency across Barbados. The Chief Welfare Officer, no doubt, spoke candidly and from the heart and factually, but I fear that the persons with disability being rolled over experientially for me is a reality, and I fear it is a reality for many members of Parliament and for many persons with disability across the communities in Barbados. Experientially for me, they do fall off of the register. Experientially for me, and I'm now approaching 20 years of doing this business, when there are, yes, I'm getting a little long in the tooth. When they are off the register, Mr. Chairman, for however long that period of time may be to get them back on, it is a period of suffering. And that period of suffering is what we have to try, not just to ameliorate, but we must make sure we are sufficiently scientific in what we're doing, that we avoid it. I think, Mr. Chairman, that the Minister made a very appropriate observation that there are some individuals, some categories of persons that we're talking about who are not likely ever to be in a position where they are going to be self-sufficient. And so therefore we cannot have people in the disabled community, especially, there are other categories of vulnerable persons among us, but them too, there must be certainty of incidents in the way in which we deliver programs to these persons who we are treating to. And I want, therefore, to come to a couple of questions that allow me to have you, Minister, and your team interface with me on this issue, especially with regard, first of all, to housing of the disabled community. Does your ministry contemplate any additional programs for the disabled in the context of housing? First of all, that may be the first limb of the question. And then the second limb would really be an invitation to you to comment, Minister, on the synergies that currently exist between your ministry and what they do, what it does, and what the Rural Development Commission and the Urban Development Commission do. And I ask for you to comment on this, and if not you as minister, then those who have been there a little bit longer, more long than you have been, so that we can get the experiential benefit of those officers who have had to manage this interface. I'm going to be very blunt with you, Minister. I am not sensing that there are performance indicators that are in place that assist your ministry to make sure that it can stay on target with regard to challenges experienced especially by the disabled community when it comes to matters relating to housing. In my constituency, I can tell you, as a matter of fact, that I could take you to two places in St. James Central right now, where in one instance we are talking about a paraplegic, in the other instance a quadriplegic, where the challenge that they face is one of a housing nature, but it has been an ongoing and tormenting experience. The question I ask again goes to the extent that we may have infrastructure adjustments that need to be made to people's houses in the disabled community, the handrails and the ramps and so on. The ability for RDC or UDC in your current relationship to deliver is something I raise an eyebrow of concern about. And I don't know, you can advise me, that's why I invite comment. Is there a direct relationship between yourselves and the private sector that you can contract directly from that ministry to the private sector to have these things done? Or do you have to go through the interface of the Rural Development Commission or the Urban Development Commission? And if there is that alternative, to what extent is that alternative of going directly to the private sector being followed? If there's not that opportunity, then why do we not do this? And if there's a good reason for that in your ministry's judgment, please tell me. I can only say to you that from what I see, where I sit, I feel that there has to be a better way of delivering the services, either through RDC or UDC or wherever they are sourced, to those people, especially in the disabled community, because they are more so than anyone else in a position where they are not just vulnerable, but they are vulnerable and less able to fend for themselves, for want of a better way of putting it. That is the first question I have for you, Minister.
Minister, thank you again for the question. This is an area that I feel so very strongly about and passionately about, and I share a number of the concerns that you have raised, certainly as an MP, but as a human being. You know, I also, while and your question is a lot about what we're doing and the institutionalization of our response, but I feel our response as a society, even as human beings, in relation to how we treat the disabled in Barbados is just not good enough. But before I speak on my own perspective on it and where I think we must go, because I think where we must go is where you want us to go, I will ask the Director of the National Disabilities Unit to speak to this matter.
Good morning, Minister. John Hollingsworth, Director, National Disabilities Unit. You raised a number of issues which pertain to what I consider, and what we should all consider, as the most vulnerable group in society, persons with disabilities. Specifically relating to the issue of housing, the National Disabilities Unit do have a relationship with the Rural Development Commission and the Urban Development Commission. In spite of the fact that we do not get directly involved in the construction of houses, our role is to advocate on behalf of persons with disabilities who, when we do our social assessments, are in need of that housing intervention. We are more directly concerned with the construction of ramps and handrails, as you would have alluded to. And where that is concerned, there is, again, as you would have indicated, some involvement in the private sector. We do not have the capacity to physically construct handrails and ramps, so we do engage small business persons to conduct this service for us. I must say at this time that they do quite an efficient job. What we have been able to do over the past year is actually increase the number of persons who are engaged in this particular service, because we would have found that the demand is so high that the pool that was in existence before, we would have had to increase that so that we can actually reach our target. I say a target because we are, like most other things as they relate to services, hamstrung by the availability of resources. We have a finite budget as it relates to the construction of ramps, and I must commend government for increasing the allocation for that particular service. In the past, we were only able to construct about 40 in one financial year. Now we're able to do as many as 50, and to date we have already done so. The other services for persons with disabilities that fall under the purview of the National Disabilities Unit are primarily done through collaborative efforts. And we have been using our initiative to ensure that they become more comfortable in their existence within the community setting. And we've done this with private sector agencies, we've done this with non-governmental organizations, with the donor agencies, UN agencies, etc., to ensure that their needs are met. I do hope that that answers some of your questions. The questions were quite comprehensive. I'm not sure I would have captured all, but I'm sure that if I did, you'll respond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hollingsworth. I noted the minister had indicated that he would want to suggest to us where he wanted us to go. And before I ask my second question, I will allow for him to say that. I would only say this in response to you, Mr. Hollingsworth, that as I heard you, I do not know what anybody else's takeaway was, but my takeaway was that you are saying that with regard to the use of the RDC and the Urban Development Commission, or your reliance on them as partner entities, you are, my own language, somewhat hamstrung by way of only being able to do advocacy of the need. Practically, from my perspective as a member of parliament, I sense that even though you may be advocating, the end result in my constituency, can't speak of anybody else's, is not always as efficient as you would want it to be. And I think that we have to have a quest for maximizing the efficiency of the output, notwithstanding the quality of the advocacy. The adjustments which are at a lower level, which is of an infrastructural effort, not talking about building a house or fixing a house, but you're coming in and you're doing a ramp and a handrail, you go directly to the private sector, as I understand it, very often. And in your words, sir, an efficient job is done. So we are seeing the efficiency at the level where you go directly to the private sector. And I'm asking the question now as a business, or sorry, I'm not asking another question, sir. I'm not allowed to. I am suggesting as a business development minister in Barbados that perhaps therein lies part of the solution, that let us work around some of the bureaucracy Not to say that the UDC and RDC don't serve useful purposes, but if we know that we need to efficiently and quickly implement a solution for a lady who is sitting in a wheelchair in a house where she lives by herself, and needs new floorboards and other things of that nature, then let us go directly to the source and have contract in the skills to oversee the delivery. The ministry itself does not have to do the building. But I feel that for too long we have flirted with this ability to just create a contractual arrangement between professionals and the ministry to come in and do the things that need to be done to bring a solution to the people who need it most. That is my view. I will give way to the Honourable Minister so that he could steer us in the direction of where he would wish to go before I ask Mr. Chairman that I be allowed to ask the second and final question.
Minister, thank you very much. The director of NDU was a little reserved in his response and did not speak, in my estimation, to a number of things that he has actually been leading to make life better for the disabled.
Honourable Minister, the chair is trying to get your attention. His microphone is not functioning at the moment.
Pardon?
Honourable Minister, can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. The Honourable Member for St. James Central has put that question and made those comments quite ably, and I would also want to have some clarification and some work being done in that particular area where I'm sure all of us as members of Parliament have persons with disabilities who have to wait for a reasonably long time for a little ramp to be built and so on, and I think that we need to be able to get past this sort of situation. So I will certainly await your response in this regard and see how best we can help these persons who are dependent on us on a daily basis, so to speak, based on their mobility or lack of it in that regard. Very good. Minister, you may proceed now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I couldn't hear you before. Sorry, I apologize, sir. I will again ask, before I speak, Minister Simmons, if that's okay with you, because I feel like the National Disabilities Unit hasn't been fair in its own estimation of its work. So I would ask the the director to speak, and then there are a few things that I wish to add after. But I want him to share on what the NDU is really doing in relation to this area and other areas to be able to help persons with disabilities, and then I will speak specifically to a few things you raised. But I also feel, Minister, that today is a good day for me because, like the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central, who asked some very stirring questions, at the end you also volunteered some solutions, and that these things are helpful going forward. Mr. Hollingsworth.
Thanks. Sorry. Thanks again for the opportunity, Minister. As it relates to the last question or the last suggestion from the chairman, where you alluded to the length of time that it takes to build a little ramp, to use your words. Previously, we had the issue of limited funding. I must again commend government for increasing that funding, which has allowed us to increase the amount of ramps we were able to build. In addition to that, the process or the actual time that it takes to construct these ramps has actually improved because, as I would have said before, we are now in a situation where we have an increased number of persons who are allocated or who are contracted to build these ramps. The only issue we have, again, relates to the availability of resources because, as we all know, it is dependent upon how funds are released by the Treasury to the National Disabilities Unit. And once the funds are released, we use up the entire vote for the construction of ramps. I must add too that when I came to the unit in December 2020, there was a significant backlog of persons waiting for ramps. So that's what you may be referring to in terms of the time that it would have taken. but I have sought to reduce that backlog, and I have been able to successfully do so over the past year. When we look at the lives of persons with disabilities in totality, we at the National Disabilities Unit have also been affected by the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic. We, in seeking to empower this unfortunate group, have designed programs to assist them in gaining employment and increasing their independence. These programs relate specifically to mangrove agricultural project that we hope to do in collaboration with the Barbados Workers Union. I would have recently received from them, the Barbados Workers Union, a lease that we would have signed to operate a property at Mangrove in St. Philip. What we hope to do there basically is to engage about 15 persons, teaching them skills in food crop production. And from this food crop production, we hope to give these intellectually challenged adolescents the skill to grow food crops, impart skills of entrepreneurship, and also provide them with some daily living skills so that when their caregivers or parents pass on, they are not left at the whims and fancies of persons in the community, but they are better able and independent to function independently. Because I personally have witnessed situations where persons with disabilities, on the passing of their parents or their caregivers, have become homeless. That was a topic. That was a personal topic earlier this morning, and therefore that is an attempt in teaching persons daily living skills to ensure or seek to assure that they're limited persons who have that fate befallen upon them. In addition to that, we also have coming on stream, a flower arranging project, and these flowers, although you would have to source some from within the private sector, it is earmarked that these flowers be grown at the same mangrove agricultural project. So it would be twofold basically. The mangrove agricultural project will produce food crops and flowers to be used in the flower arranging project, and this would be an additional opportunity for persons with disabilities to earn an income. Because at the end of the day, being the most vulnerable group in society, persons with disabilities need the employment opportunities, because I regret to say that within the private sector, there is not a great appreciation for the abilities of persons with disabilities, and therefore people frown on them as prospective employees. They, in a lot of cases, do not give them the opportunity that they deserve to be engaged in gainful employment. One or two companies have been able to do so, and these are limited types of disabilities, and these may not necessarily be physical, but sensory. Speaking specifically about the hearing impaired, for instance. These persons have been able to find employment. I'm sure that some of us may have seen them engaged at Massey supermarket, where they are packers primarily, and merchandisers especially. In addition to that, at the National Disabilities Unit, we are, as the Minister alluded to in his opening remarks, we are seeing a situation where persons who require prostheses are increasing. What we have sought to do, and it was granted at the end of this current financial year, a supplemental to meet the rising demand. And this would have occurred as a result of the situation of our NCDs, vehicular accidents, violence in the society. And in responding to this, what we have done is seek to engage the providers of this service on a contractual basis to ensure that we have the most competitive prices, because the prosthesis is not a cheap implement. The most competitive prices for these persons who need this service. What we have observed recently through publication in the media, in the newspapers particularly, is that there are persons, adolescents, children at secondary schools who are developing issues of scoliosis, which is a deformity of the spine, and they are in need of support braces. This service, to the best of my knowledge, was not provided before. We have now embarked to ensure that they benefit from this particular service.
Mr. Director, I'm sure that you would want to go on, but there would be other opportunities for you to expand and continue your contribution. We would just ask that you wrap up your answer if you haven't already done so. Thanks.
Yes, I just want to add basically that apart from these, their whole gamut of services, because within the COVID-19 pandemic as well as it relates to persons with disabilities, they have been affected by the non-face-to-face teaching. These are particularly students. And what we have had to do in order to respond to that particular issue is to engage again the private contractors to provide transportation for these persons, because the service that was previously provided through a collaborative effort with the Transport Board, through the mechanical issues that they experienced with the buses that were earmarked for this service, being down, we would have had to engage the services of private contractors. So there's a whole lot that is being done for persons with disabilities, and we as a caring agency within the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs seek to ensure that we spare no effort in ensuring that the lives of these persons who are the most vulnerable, I must stress, within our community are made as easy as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Minister, very quickly, so as to answer, I mean, you posed a question to me as well. Let me just say very quickly, Minister, I take the point that you raised, and I want to say a few things. One of the things that we promised and that we must deliver is a commission and a policy to improve the lives of persons with disabilities. Our colleague and the MP for St. James North will be integrally involved in that. We've also had Senator Boyce, who himself is a person with a disability, and I don't want people to focus on any disabilities, because the truth is you could be disabled and have many, many talents. And he is an attorney, brilliant, or about to be an attorney, extremely brilliant, as are many persons. So we're going to be receiving the input from the community itself. And one of the things that was on the table before was that there was an original bill drafted in the previous administration, and that bill was in response to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And in our conversations so far with the community, particularly with Mr. Boyce and with Mr. Hinkson, there is a belief that that bill, our new draft bill, must be a lot more accommodating. It must be wider in scope. It must address the practical concerns and realities of persons who have disabilities. And so some of the things that we must address must relate, of course, to housing. Now, I know there is a policy in government where, as it relates to building government housing, that we must engage NHC. So we must work with NHC to be able to do that, to build out housing that is relevant and suitable for persons with disabilities and various disabilities. Not every person who has a disability, their disability is a physical one. So it must be able to address the wide range of disabilities. I also felt like, in my previous ministry, where Town and Country Planning are the new department in relation to the Physical Development Act, and perhaps the minister formerly in Economic Affairs could tell me, but the way Coastal Zone would have to comment on whether they thought a structure was appropriate on the coast, perhaps there is a case to be made for persons in the disabled community to also comment. If it is not there, it could be there, but for them to offer comment on the kind of buildings that we build, whether in the private sector or whether in the business community. So I think it would be to our benefit, all of us, to have a meeting, Minister, because as I'm very serious about this ministry being empowering, and part of that being business development. For us to have a meeting, sir, where we could look at some of these things, not only in bringing persons on board to help us build, which is very important for the private sector to become a true partner who can respond a lot quicker, because the bureaucracy, we know, stifles all of us, but also for us to have a conversation beyond the physical build-out to a bigger, larger policy on how do we create a physically, a truly meaningful, accessible, fully accessible Barbados for persons with disabilities, so that you're not just inconvenienced in town, or you're not inconvenienced in the new vendors mall, vendors markets that we are building, and those kind of things. So I do look forward to that conversation, Minister.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I welcome the opportunity to have that conversation. And as we are using that language, Minister, I go to the next question, which really is a capacity conversation that I wanted to invite you to have with us. You obviously are a new minister in this ministry, And as you had indicated, you want to bring a certain, he's not a new minister, but a new minister in this particular ministry, and had indicated that he wanted to bring a certain freshness of approach to a number of things. I think that, to be fair to you, Minister, there's a need for us here to be able to stimulate a conversation on the matter of the capacity of the ministry to do the very many things that the ministry is expected to do and be able to deliver on. If we don't use these estimates, as I said at the very beginning, to speak to the certainty of incidence of categories of expenditure, then we are going to waste the time that we have allocated to us. I think that there are some areas that I have observed where I certainly would benefit from hearing from you and your officers as to the capacity constraints that you may or may not have. I do not have a fire in my constituency, thank God, every single month. And I don't have a fire in my constituency every single weekend. But when I've had fires in my constituency that happen on weekends, and there have been a few times, the challenge that I have found over the years has been that it is almost impossible to make contact with an officer who is able to immediately be on the ground in order to assist in the delivery of services in a crisis situation to people who are the victims of that experience. It is expected that it might be a little bit more difficult to have these solutions over a holiday period like Christmas, over a weekend period. But Minister, I feel that this is something now that we have to begin to put behind us. I do not know if my experience is one that others have shared, but I certainly feel, Minister, that there has to be a way of being able to reach the heartbeat or the pulse of where the social service solution is found, even on a weekend or on over a long weekend or holiday period or something like that. Equally, as part of the conversation on capacity, Minister, and I invite you to speak candidly to the House, I listened to the members of your team, I think it was the Chief Welfare Officer, maintaining the fact that there is a quality of or quantity of audit being done with respect to the quality of the houses which are rented. But I listened but did not hear or was not persuaded that I was satisfied that the audit is a current audit. Yes, you may have people who go there and test to see what quality of the house is that is rented by the ministry. But I must tell you, Minister, and I know that there has been for many years, so this precedes you, it precedes the previous minister, it precedes this government, there have been slumlords in Barbados, and there still are. And I know of people who are renting in circumstances which are, I think, quite frankly, close to squalor. And unfortunately, some of them lay claim to being able to rent under the umbrella of the ministry that you now lead. So it tells me that there may be a little bit of disconnect between that which is being articulated, and I want to stress, I believe it is being articulated in good faith. But I think that what we need to be satisfied of is the capacity that the ministry has to maintain a regular and current audit of the quality of the houses which are being rented across the whole landscape of Barbados. I have practiced law in this country, Minister. I know a lot of things that happen in many ways that they are done. And
Honourable Member, could you please ask the question?
Oh, yeah, but the question really, sir, has been asked. The question is one of the capacity, in this case, to maintain the audit of quality of the houses rented. And the third aspect of the capacity conversation really is the legal capacity of the ministry to superintend some of the things that it is intended to do. it may happen, I don't know, but I have never come across a situation where somebody has been prosecuted for parking in a zone for disabled persons. I don't know, but I would love to know what is the state of affairs with regard to that right now. Is it something that is honored in the breach, or is it something that is enforced? And if so, how successfully are we enforcing it? That's the kind of capacity conversation that I want us to have, Minister.
Thank you, Minister, for your one question with 20 parts. I will attempt to answer some of them and to ask the Chief Welfare Officer to respond, the Permanent Secretary to respond, the NDU to respond as well. So I too am first and foremost an MP. It would be nice to have a study actually done as to how many fires actually occur on weekends, and if there is some correlation between the weekends and the fires, because perhaps that would be helpful for us in preventing them. Because most of my fires actually occurred on weekends. And like you, Honourable Member for St. James Central, I found myself in very difficult, oftentimes lonely waters, and my fires occurred, most of them in the late evening. Trying to find a response appropriately at the time to be able to help with the fire. So during the conversation that we had on the restructuring of the social services, and this must happen before the restructuring, and I know that the former minister and the member for St. Thomas also felt the same, because I've heard her express her views in relation to us being able to offer a better response to persons who've had an emergency. And I don't even mean necessarily an entire country emergency, but like a one-person emergency, like a fire. And our capacity to be able to better respond to that. And I am being very blunt and very honest that I do not think our current response is appropriate. And I have had fires at one point. You said you don't have them daily, but at one point I was having fires almost weekly. And between myself and the minister who borders me, Minister Cattle, she too, when we were having fires, her side and my side and her side. So we had a series of fires, and so I know firsthand the gap that I think exists there. Again, we're going to the same agency in welfare for the most part, and going to the same people who I've already said are overburdened. I'm glad you framed it, Minister, as a capacity question, not necessarily a capability question, because there were a number of cases where the same officers who are responsible for doing everything else during the week are the same persons who are responsible for responding to these emergencies. It is a system that is designed almost to fail. And there is no way that one person can be able to do all these things. And so in our reimagined department, there must be, and we discussed this, a 24-hour emergency response that is staffed by persons in the Department of Family Services whose job it is to respond whether the emergency occurs in the middle of the day or in the middle of the night. And for that department to have the kind of resources to grant the immediate relief that people need. I've heard the PS speak in our meetings about just a bag, a few pieces of clothing, food items, and so on. But that whether this emergency falls on a Sunday, a Saturday, a weekend, a holiday, that there are persons whose job it is to respond. But those persons obviously wouldn't be responsible for the day-to-day affairs in welfare. And that is what we currently have. We currently have an overburdened system being asked to respond to scenarios where they are not properly able to so respond. And so that 24-hour unit is coming, the 24-hour unit in the Department of Family Services, and before we establish that department in the Ministry of People Empowerment, that will be able to respond to these emergencies immediately. It will be staffed obviously by ourselves, but that is all part of the relationship now between ourselves, Ministry of Housing, and our capacity to be able to have a few houses available to us. People who have an emergency often want housing, and we have to be able to accommodate them in temporary housing. You've already heard that there is definitely a shortfall in getting persons to come forward with houses. But whatever we do must be transitional, and that persons who enter these houses, we must move as quickly as possible to get them back on their feet. Or that which is meant to be a temporary situation could easily become permanent. A person who's supposed to be a transient experience in poverty could become a permanent relationship with poverty. And so we have to be able to move them a lot faster than we've been able to move them. I also know that as it related to the ELSA cases, there were cases of the houses that are being used are constantly audited to make sure that they're up to standard, up to scratch, and so on. And when that is not the case, then different decisions are made. The Chief Welfare Officer would have to speak about the audits done in relation to the houses that they use and how frequently those are audited. But I do know an assessment is made up front in relation to being able to respond. But look, Minister, we have a problem. We have more demand than we have supply. We have more persons who are requiring these services than we have the capacity to be able to respond. And that is why I feel that this conversation, though, and I keep making the point, and I want it to be understood.
Honourable Minister, you should proceed to wrap up your response at this time.
I am wrapping up, sir. Sorry, my apologies. But I just want this to be able to understood, sir, that the Ministry of People's Empowerment in its current iteration and the way the ministry is structured, while, yes, these people present to the social services sector, the challenges that they're facing are not necessarily social services challenges. And that if we are going to right the wrongs, the whole, at every point along this continuum, there are different things that have to be able to, that we address. We have to address housing differently from social sector housing, because housing is a problem, period. We have to be able to address employment and various things along the continuum so that persons are able to get back on their feet a lot quicker. We do not have the number of houses that I wish we had, but I promise you, Minister, because it affects all of us, that there is going to be an emergency response department in the ministry that responds more efficiently to fires, and that MPs, because MPs become the fireman, the doctor, the policeman, the psychiatrist, the welfare department. An MP oftentimes bears housing. You know, I've known of cases where MPs house people in their constituency office. The MP bears the brunt of all of it. So I hear you, Minister. It is real for all of us, and I promise that there is going to be an emergency response department, and that we have to look seriously, perhaps at the level of cabinet, when I bring the paper about offering housing and different amenities for persons who suffer these consequences. In relation to your other question, when you were not so convinced by the Chief, in relation to what it is that we are doing, again, we will also have to be able to effectively review that, and while no excuses are being made, there is a need for us to work with other agencies to be able to deliver some of the things that we are challenged now to be able to deliver, but the capacity gap is certainly real.
Minister, I'm very grateful to you and to your team. I think that obviously it is a Herculean task that you are facing. And I think the benefit of a candid discussion on the actual capacity constraints that your ministry is facing helps us as a parliament, especially at this time when we're discussing the government's allocation of revenue and its commitment to expenditure, to be able to assist in setting priorities which must be set for this very important ministry and the work that it has to do for the people. So Minister, I trust that you all will continue in good spirit, and I wish you well in your endeavors.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the Speaker progress of the bill, and ask for leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker, and beg for leave to sit again. Honourable members in favor, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 2:25 p.m.
The question that this honourable chairman be suspended until 2:25 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This honourable chairman stands suspended until 2:25 p.m.